that did a lot of different things and could respond to people like quickly. I want a stapler and a pillow and a book, and I want it now.
The past, present, and future of one of America's largest warehouse regions. That is next on Marketplace. All things considered back at 7. It's 6:30.
Support for WNYC comes from Audible Theater's Sorry for Your Loss, a new show from writer Michael Cruz Kane that tackles the pain of unexpected loss with unexpected comedy. Previews begin April 28th. Tickets and more at sorryforyourlossshow.com.
If you believe democracy requires a free press, your station is WNYC, 93.9 FM and AM 820, NPR News and the New York Conversation.
Marketplace is supported by Betterment, offering an FDIC-insured high-yield cash account through program banks built for peace of mind. Betterment is not a bank. Betterment.com/cash reserve.
Economics doesn't have to be dull and boring, you know. Just stick around. We'll show you. From American Public Media, this is Marketplace.
Marketplace is supported by ChargePoint, charging for electric cars, trucks, buses, and beyond. Learn more at ChargePoint.com. ChargePoint, driving a better way. And by Amazon Business, helping provide a smarter, easier way to get the supplies businesses need to thrive. Amazon Business, your partner for smart business buying. And by EquityZen Securities, LLC. With EquityZen funds, accredited investors can invest in the private companies shaping the future before they go public at EquityZen.com/radio.
In Los Angeles, I'm Kyle Rizdal. It is Wednesday today, the 19th day of April. Good as always to have you along, everybody. We are just a little bit less than 2 weeks away from the next meeting of the Interest Rate Setting Federal Open Market Committee, and you all know the state of play as well as I do. Unclear it would be that state of play. Maybe they're going to pause. Maybe they're going to raise rates 0.25 percentage point, maybe more. Austan Goolsbee is one of the 11 people who are going to have a vote come meeting time. He is the new-ish president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago after a long stint at the University of Chicago and a couple of years at the Obama White House as well. Austan, it's good to have you back on the program.
Thank you, Kai. Thanks for having me back.
30 seconds at the top of the show and the top of the interview. What's your gut on this economy right now?
I'm still waiting to see whether there are other credit shoes to drop, I'd say. Not in the crisis sense, but in the how much squeezing is going to be coming from the bank side. I think it's going to matter for whether this economy is going to slow down. Everybody's forecasting some growth slowdown for the second half of the year. How intense that will be is going to depend a lot on the financial part.
I'll be honest with you. I did not expect to hear credit conditions being the first thing out of your mouth.
Yeah, I mean, it's because that's been the order of the day. I mean, for sure, we're watching the job market is by far the strongest part of the economy, still getting really unprecedented numbers. And inflation, there's been some improvement, but in a way, that's the worst part of the economy, is that's proved more persistent than for sure we wanted a year ago. And this is a problem. If you look at the Eurozone, inflation's about 7%. The U.S. is about 5%. So there are a lot of countries trying to deal with these similar issues.
You gave a speech last week. I think your first big speech since you got the Chicago job. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But anyway, it was a big speech. And you said, in talking about credit conditions and what the Fed might do, you said it's proper to be cautious to sort of see how things play out. And everybody's interpreting that as you saying, you know what, let's take a pause on raising rates. Are we reading you the right way?
Well, I didn't say. I mean, we still got a couple of weeks before the actual meeting. So if anybody imputed some specific basis points of what I was for, that'd be inaccurate. Most of my message was
we all imputed that.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
I can't speak for others. My message is be prudent, be patient. The tightening of credit conditions, if they happen in a doesn't even have to be a credit crunch, and for sure doesn't have to be a financial crisis. If banks are pulling back, it behooves us to pay attention to the data and ask how much of our normal monetary policy job is getting done for us by the credit conditions.
Yeah, credit conditions aside, what other data are you looking at? What else do you need to see to understand that inflation's moving in the right direction and that there is, all right, I'm going to use the phrase, even though it's kind of fallen out of fashion, there's a possibility of a soft landing?
Transitory soft landing. There's a series of words you're never supposed to say, Kai.
I know.
You've broken the rule. Look, I'll tell you the things that I look at, and I'll tell you a couple that I think we should stop looking at. The ones we should look at are the month-to-month inflation. As you know, when we quote the number, we tend to look backward for a year. But of course, that's not an indicator of what's happening instantaneously on prices. So the month-to-month inflation increment, and especially core services, not including housing, I would say, because we have a pretty good idea that housing kind of lags and that the components of that will likely mean it's going to start coming down in the near future. The thing that I think too many people look at is wages. And the reason I think it's a mistake is that if you look historically, the data show that wages are not a leading indicator of prices. They actually lag prices. So you can get, at moments of transition, you can really get yourself twisted into a pretzel that you don't want to be.
Not that Jay Powell is the be-all and end-all, but he talks about wages all the time. Do you think your view is shared amongst other members of the Federal Open Market Committee?
I don't. I definitely do not speak for any other members of the Federal Open Market Committee. I'm a huge fan of Jay Powell, and I admire his thinking. I think if for sure wage growth and price growth are tied together. What my comment, I realize it's a little bit in the weeds, but is just the question of, are wages a leading or a lagging indicator of price inflation? The thing that we should be watching in the here and now over the next 2 weeks or so before the FOMC meeting, I think are on the price side and on the credit side.
Step back for me for a minute, Austin, and let's talk big picture here. As you said in the Chicago speech, and you've certainly said elsewhere, these are wildly uncertain times. We're still recovering from the pandemic in terms of the macroeconomy. There is the war in Ukraine, the labor market, who knows, and this economy and the supply chain and all of that stuff. How much does that affect how you and your colleagues on the Federal Open Market Committee are thinking about what to do? Because it seems to be a confusing time.
Yes, at the least, it's a confusing time. It definitely affects my thinking. It's super confusing looking as we come out of a business cycle that really didn't look anything like any previous business cycle. Manufacturing did not lead it. The cyclical components of the economy were not the things that went down in a recession. It was going to the dentist and a bunch of stuff that's usually recession proof. Now there's pent-up demand for these services. Are they even influenced by the interest rate? We don't know that. So I think everybody's got to take a step back, as you phrased it, and just try to get a handle on, are we back to normal, or are we in some in-between state, or is this what the world is going to be forever?
Well, answer your own question. Are we back to normal? This is the easiest interview ever. Answer your own question.
The answer is yes. We are a yes to many of those. And I guess I still think go gather all the data that you can gather. Look at more series than you normally need to look at. That's what you do. If you're an old-fashioned data dog like me, in a moment of uncertainty, what you do is go sniff things.
This seems like an appropriate point in this interview to ask this question. You have a more informal speaking style, shall we say, than most of your colleagues amongst the Federal Reserve officials. I wonder, I mean, look, you've been at the national level in economic policy for a long time, going back to the Obama White House, so this is not your first rodeo. I wonder, though, now that your words arguably carry more weight, Has that changed? It obviously hasn't changed how you communicate, has it?
Oh, I think it has. I might be irreverent, but I'm less so than I was before, and I'll take that as a caution, and I appreciate you.
No, look, I had, your speech in Chicago the other day was the first, and all apologies to all of your colleagues. That's the first economist speech I've watched in a long time that actually had some laughs and was, digestible. So that matters, right? What the Fed says and how it communicates matters.
Look, I hope for the Fed that we can at least be understood. There's a lot of misinformation about the Fed. So I take as a compliment. I'm sure our media folks are going to be sweating, if they, every time I stand up, they're like, oh no, but let us strive as a Federal Reserve System to explain why the Fed is especially important at times like this. And the law gives the Fed a job. Stabilize prices, maximize employment. That's the job. And as I say, there's nothing in the job description about pay a lot of attention to the stock market or be as opaque as possible. There's nothing in there about that. Let us all embrace the mission of the Fed, and I think we'd be better off.
Austan Goolsbee is the president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. Austan, thanks a lot. I appreciate your time.
Thanks, Guy.
Reddit calls itself the front page of the internet. Countless forums and communities and chat rooms covering almost any subject you can think of. And then some. As of yesterday, though, there's a paywall of sorts around the data it has from all those forums and committees and chat rooms. Reddit's going to start charging big companies to access its absolute avalanche of 13 billion posts and comments. And it's doing it for two reasons. Number one, the company is expected to go public soon. And number two, and maybe more importantly, Reddit's a huge source of data for AI platforms, including ChatGPT. Marketplace's Matt Levin has that one.
You know how you'll hear a couple teenagers talking and sometimes it sounds like it's a different language? They'll be like, that's so cringe. And you're like, what does that mean? And they're like, okay, boomer. And you're like, I'm 38. Well, large language AI models like ChatGPT can empathize. I mean, if they had feelings, they could empathize.
Language models learn about the meaning of cringe from the context in which it's used. So if you don't have examples of cringe being used in the new context, it's not going to know anything about it.
Amin Ahmed is chief technology officer at an AI company called Vectara. He says language changes quickly online.
If you take Reddit out of the equation, you've taken out a huge percentage of the conversations that are going on the internet. Now, I'm sure there's still other sources left, but I'm not sure that they compare to Reddit either in volume or quality.
If you look at Reddit conversations, they are kind of civil conversational back and forth, at least relative to other social media, and there's literally billions of them. Until now, all that was free. Nathan Lambert at the AI company Hugging Face says expect that to change, and not just at Reddit.
I think it's a smart business move. Platforms that have very large amounts of data on the internet would likely see that they can make a decent amount of money on this.
So beyond selling user data to advertisers, social media companies could sell that data to AI. And if you're generally worried about how AI will respond to being fed a steady diet of social media, well, we fed an entire generation of humans on social media. It's not like that was harmful. I'm Matt Levin for Marketplace.
There's another one from the American labor market. People leaving or just switching jobs has been the new thing the past couple of years. We've talked about that. Turns out same thing is happening in C-suites too, not just among the rank and file. A bunch of companies have announced exits of late. Doc Martens, Walmart, The Body Shop as well. C-suite turnover ticked up last year, and according to a new report from the outplacement firm Challenger Gray and Christmas, CEO turnover last quarter hit its highest rate since 2020. Marketplace's Kristen Schwab looks at what's happening at the top.
At the beginning of the pandemic, when everything in the world and in business was so uncertain, companies held onto their CEOs for dear life. But now,
there's pent-up demand for change at the top.
Andy Challenger is vice president of Challenger Gray and Christmas.
Now, as things have started to even out, companies feel more comfortable selecting new CEOs and leaders.
This sort of rush for change at the top, at many companies, all at once, isn't that uncommon. It's often tied to big economic events. And Yo-Jud Chang, a professor of business administration at the University of Virginia, says that creates a scramble for talent.
It's really not a huge pool of individuals. And so once you start seeing some movement, it's really quite common to start to see a ripple effect across a bunch of different companies.
In other words, it's poaching season. Meanwhile, expectations for C-suite executives have changed. Joseph Fuller is a professor of management practice at Harvard.
Suddenly, they're supposed to be able to be on social media, go from a meeting with an asset manager in New York to CNBC. They can sing, they can dance, they can recite Shakespeare's sonnets by memory.
He says this is causing management to burn out faster. The average age of exiting CEOs near the end of last year was 56, down from 60. And with more responsibility comes higher compensation.
And that really means that many executives, when they are facing exhaustion, they're leaving with 8- and 9-figure net worths.
I mean, why not retire early? I'm Kristen Schwab for Marketplace.
Coming up,
I want a stapler and a pillow and a book, and I want it now.
I'll get right on that. First, though, let's do the numbers. Dow Industrial's off 79 today, just shy of 0.25%, finished at 33,897. The NASDAQ crept up about 3 points. We'll call that flat, 12,157. The S&P 500 also basically flat, 41 and 54. Citigroup said on its earnings call that delinquency rates are rising for its credit cards, and they expect them to rise further. Citigroup shares nonetheless gained 0.6%. As for some of the other major credit card purveyors, American Express added 0.33%. MasterCard grew about 0.1%. Visa down 0.4%. Bond prices down as well. Yield on the 10-year T-note rose to 3.59%. You're listening to Marketplace.
Marketplace is supported by Progressive. Progressive Commercial Insurance protects small businesses from retailers to tradespeople. Progressive covers a variety of business needs with a range of coverages. More at progressivecommercial.com. And by Brave, a software company dedicated to making the web safer, more private, and easier to use. Brave's web browser features built-in privacy protection against ads, trackers, fingerprinting, and more. Learn more at brave.com. And by SoFi. With a SoFi high-yield savings account, members can earn more money on their money. Plus, deposits are FDIC insured. Learn more at SoFi.com, SoFi.com. Get your money right. SoFi Bank, N.A., member FDIC.
WNYC is supported by Drexel University in Philadelphia. Drexel's cooperative education program can help students explore a career, build a resume, and earn a salary all before graduation. More information at drexel.edu/ambition. Can't wait.
On the next Brian Lehrer Show, we'll continue our Earth Week series with a journalist for City Limits magazine who finds that New York City's so-called greenest buildings are often less efficient than similarly certified buildings nationwide. Why is that, and what can be done? Plus, my questions and yours for Senator Kirsten Gillibrand in our monthly Call Your Senator segment. The Brian Lehrer Show, weekdays at 10 a.m. on WNYC.
You're listening to Marketplace on WNYC. In the 7 o'clock hour of All Things Considered, Netflix said yesterday that it is ending its DVD by mail service after 25 years. Some longtime users say they're bummed about that. We're going to hear that and more at 7.
This is Marketplace. I'm Kai Ryssdal. California's trying real hard to electrify just about everything in the 5th biggest economy in the world, or electrify as much as we can. Cars, of course, appliances, really, you name it. That kind of transformation, though, is not cheap. So last year, the legislature out here decided some people are going to pay more so that most people can pay less. Marketplace's Lily Jamali explains.
Setting utility rates is a complicated business, says former California utility regulator Steve Weissman.
And yet the impacts of these things look very uncomplicated to the people who are bearing the burden.
Especially true here in California, where the average investor-owned utility customer pays up to twice as much for each unit of power as the national average, which doesn't bode well for California's efforts to electrify everything.
In order to do that, you're going to be fighting against yourself if you keep raising the cost of each kilowatt hour.
California is trying to bring that cost down with a new approach, a flat fee tacked onto your utility bill based on income. The fee stays the same no matter how much a customer uses, but customers could end up paying less for each unit of electricity they consume under the new structure. James Salih is an associate professor at UC Berkeley.
If we just make the fixed charges low for low-income households, they can be net winners under this reform.
California's biggest investor-owned utility, PG&E, says top earners would pay around $92 extra per month. Low-income customers would pay as low as $15, and they would see a drop of about a fifth to their utility bills despite this tacked-on fee. But Loretta Lynch, former head of the California Public Utilities Commission, is skeptical.
I think it's really just rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic of the excessive costs that have imposed on Californians.
She says the way Californians get their electricity needs a deeper look beyond this new fee. I'm Lily Jamali for Marketplace.
You click buy on your phone or your tablet or your device of choice. Whatever you bought shows up at your doorstep a day or two later, and you go on about your business without really much of a thought for what had happened in between the click and the delivery. But in some places, what happens in between is kind of everything. Places where transportation and warehousing are the biggest employers. Often, they are the most controversial industries in town. Marketplace's Justin Ho went to Rancho Cucamonga in the Inland Empire of Southern California to have a look at what's happened since the logistics business took over out there.
On the south side of Rancho Cucamonga, there's a 1-mile stretch of Hermosa Avenue, lined with almost nothing but warehouses and distribution centers on either side of the street, and constant truck traffic.
One is just leaving a warehouse, and then another has been sitting here for, an hour and a half or so, in the middle of the median, just idling.
That's Susan Phillips. She's the director of the Robert Redford Conservancy for Southern California Sustainability at Pitzer College. It's been keeping track of truck traffic in the region between Rancho Cucamonga and its neighboring city, Ontario.
It's significant. 96,000 truck trips a day, I think. That cumulative effect is part of what we're interested in tracking.
Those trucks spew out greenhouse gases and particulate matter. And just a block away, the cluster of warehouses gives way to a residential neighborhood.
And so you have this pattern of, kids that maybe grow up with asthma. They've been breathing this air their whole lives. They got trucks running up and down the street near where their school is.
Warehouses first started popping up in the Inland Empire in the 70s and 80s. Julianne Emmons Allison, a professor at UC Riverside who studies the warehousing industry, says back then they were all about storing goods that came through the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach.
If you're in Boston and you buy something that comes into the port in Los Angeles, it has to come through this area and use all these warehouses and facilities and logistics.
Today's warehouses are doing a lot more than just storing stuff. Thanks to the growth of online shopping, especially in the last decade, pallets of goods have to be broken down and sorted, and then repackaged so that they can be shipped out. Allison says as a result, warehouses have gotten a lot bigger.
Because you needed to have these facilities that did a lot of different things and could respond to people quickly. I want a stapler and a pillow and a book, and I want it now.
The number of warehouses in the Inland Empire has roughly doubled every decade since the 80s, according to data from Pitzer College. And now the industry employs over 250,000 people in the region.
From moving those goods to processing those goods and to fulfilling those orders. And so, it's a real backbone for the economy throughout Southern California.
That's John Switalski, executive director of the Rebuild SoCal Partnership, a group that advocates for infrastructure investment. He says the logistics industry's growth has created more than just warehousing jobs.
You now start to bring in corporate headquarters. You bring in different types of companies that want to service this industry. And so when you cluster that, there becomes exponential benefit.
The boom in online shopping that happened during the pandemic helped turn transportation and warehousing into the Inland Empire's biggest employer. Manfred Kyle, chief economist at the Inland Empire Economic Partnership, says the jobs the industry offers align with the skills of the region's workers.
The labor force does not have very high education levels, and therefore, perhaps, it suits them very much to work in the logistics industry.
But it isn't likely to make them rich. Per capita income in the region puts it in the bottom quarter of metropolitan areas in the U.S. Kyle says that's because the transportation and warehousing industry just doesn't pay as much as some others.
As much as it has done for employment, it has done very little to average income.
A spokesperson for Amazon, which operates several warehouses in the area and is a marketplace underwriter, said the company is proud of its competitive pay and comprehensive benefits. But the jobs the industry has created in the region might not last, says Johannes Munoz, a professor at the University of Redlands. He's been researching how many of the region's jobs could be automated with today's technology. The answer? Almost 2/3.
And so we are the fourth most vulnerable metro in the nation and the most vulnerable metro in California.
Munoz says that doesn't mean it makes economic sense for employers to replace workers with robots right now. But as automation gets cheaper, that could change. I'm Justin Ho for Marketplace.
This final note on the way out today, a little bit more from Austin Goolsbee, that speech I mentioned that he gave in Chicago last week, relevant to the politics of this economy that are on the agenda in Washington right now.
Side note, moments of financial stress are a particularly bad time to punch yourself in the face by taking actions that could ignite a financial crisis on their own, like, say, defaulting on U.S. Treasuries in a fight about the debt limit. When I was a kid, I dreamed of starting a guidebook series of places that were awful called Let's Not Go. And that dream died when I realized nobody wants to buy a guidebook for a place they have no interest in going. But if I had started it, I would write one about defaulting on U.S. Treasury and the debt limit. Let's not go there.
Latest thinking, by the way, is that push may come to shove on the debt limit mid-June-ish.
Marketplace is supported by Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, where research on the EGFR mutation is leading to exciting new developments in lung cancer therapy. danafarber.org/stories. And by Domo, the data experience platform innovator that puts data to work for everyone so they can multiply their impact on the business. More at domo.com. And by JLL, focusing on uncovering insights to identify strategic locations for where to break new ground in commercial real estate. JLL.com. See a brighter way.
All right, we're going. Here, though, is your moment of economic context. The taste of the future from the Fed's beige book that came out today. From the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, this item, quote, contacts noted turning to automation to fill repetitive, understaffed roles. So far, so good. Continuing the quote, though, some have begun to leverage the use of artificial intelligence in lieu of hiring for certain professional positions. Our media production team includes Brian Allison, Jake Cherry, Drew Jostad, Gary O'Keefe, Jeff Peters, Charlton Thorpe, Juan Carlos Serrato, and Becca Weinman. I'm Kai Risdal. We will see you tomorrow, everybody. This is APM.